This week, I'm going to share with you 4 dead private investigator tricks that we're better off without, and one I kind of miss. Hi, this is Larry Kaye with ShadowAnyone.com and the creator of the Investigator's Ultimate Guide series. You can find out about that, learn all sorts of things about that over at ShadowAnyone.com. I want to talk today about 4 things that used to be done back in the day that aren't done or shouldn't be done anymore. And you know what? Good riddance to those 4 things. The first one is a surveillance trick. Not a trick in a good way, not like a hack or something that will help you, but unscrupulous private investigators might use the crisscross directory, and I teach about that in my free report over at shadowanyone.com. The report, if you want to be a private investigator, give up unless you do these 3 things. You can learn a little bit about crisscross directories over there. But they would, in the olden days, and I mean like the 80s and even the 90s, unscrupulous private investigators would look up neighbors of a house they were supposed to surveil, do a pretext call in about maybe appraisals in the neighborhood, and ask them questions about the house that they were hired to do surveillance on. This way, they would get a good idea, an accurate image of what the house is. What color is the house? Does it have shutters? What color are the shutters? Where are the bushes and trees? Any cars parked out front? That type of thing. They would get this information over the phone from neighbors using a pretext so that they could fake their report and pretend as if they had been out there actually doing a surveillance. It would seem credible because they had these details that you would have to be there to know about, but in fact, they could fake this report without ever leaving their office. This is a dead trend or trick because of being able to go online and look at different areas of streets and properties and houses. I don't think it's credible anymore just to kind of describe that type of thing. And this is one of those reasons, a little hint here that I give to all working private investigators. And there's so many good ways you can use this in with your marketing and everything else. But, you should be getting 30 seconds worth of video when you're doing surveillance. Every hour, get that 30 seconds of video, whether anything's happening or not, just to prove you're out there. And again, for people who think they're being slick or tricky, I would encourage you, and what I did was try to get things that include shadows so that as the hours pass, you can see the sun goes across the sky and these shadows move. A client can actually see that you are out there. If anyone questions that you are actually out there, you have this video evidence that you were out there and out there for hours. The second dead private investigator trick that we're better off without is this idea of putting something heavy in the way of a person who you're doing surveillance on, especially if they're doing a workers' compensation case or claiming some kind of injury. In the old days, a private investigator, an unscrupulous private investigator, this was never legitimate, would put a heavy rock behind someone's car or some cinder blocks so that the person had to come out of their house. They'd see the rock or cinder blocks and have to move them out of the way before they could drive off. The private investigator would sit back after placing these obstacles in the way, these heavy obstacles, and film. And when the person came out and moved the cinder blocks or the rock, the private investigator had this video evidence. And of course, we know how much cinder blocks weigh, or you could weigh the rock and say, this is what we discovered, that they're able to move this much weight. When you do surveillance, and I talk about this in the Investigator's Ultimate Guide to Surveillance, you're just never interfering. You are strictly an observer, and an observer that they don't know about. That way you get accurate, fair representation of what's going on. The third dead private investigator trick that I want to share with you is asking police for information. Now, I think decades ago, maybe only a couple of decades ago, this was, a much more time-honored type thing to know a cop or know somebody that could get you information. It just isn't done anymore, not really. We know that public records are out there, police records. You have easy access to accident reports, police reports, all sorts of information that the police are generating. That's not to say that they don't have some confidential things, but you really shouldn't be getting access to that anyways. It may not be admissible. There may be some questionable legalities with that type of thing. But the fact of the matter is, we as private investigators have so many resources available to us. And I would kind of argue more than the police department in many ways. We can talk about that someday. But we have so many resources available to us, and we have so much access easily, legitimately, and legally to the information that the police are gathering and generating, that this idea of having a cop that's a buddy that can feed you information, that just doesn't happen, I don't think, very much at all anymore. Maybe not really at all. The fourth dead private investigator trick that we're better off without, this is just a cheap, lazy way when people were doing surveillance, would be to bust out a tail light on a car. So what you do is you could, take a little hammer, bust out the red around the tail light, so you had this bright white light that would make this car easy to follow at night, or to break out the light completely so it was out and you're just following the car with only one tail light. You can be much, much further back, and if you've ever had to do a surveillance on a car with a bad or missing light, it's just so much easier because at night, so far away, you can identify that particular vehicle. But to actually break the light yourself in order to aid your surveillance, that's a dirty trick. It's not anything. It's not legal. No one is going to go for that. If it's ever found out, you're done from that perspective anyways. There are some technological gadgets that are available these days. Small blinking lights that really small, that you can attach just to like a 9-volt battery with a magnet and attach to the bottom of a car or near a car somewhere, and the light blinks as an infrared, a lot like the LED that's in the remote control for your television. And with the proper vision equipment, you can clearly see that blinking light at night, and that makes your car much easier to follow. I don't consider that unethical. I do see it as pretty unnecessary. I've never had to do that. I'm not the greatest guy in the world. I'm not pretending that I am, but I would have to be some pretty extraordinary circumstances before I felt that I needed to take that extreme step of attaching a blinking infrared light to a car in order to follow it. It's clever. It's neat. I just have never found it necessary. Now, the one dead private investigator trick that I kind of miss, and this is when we used to need to get asset information, bank account information from somebody. That has been greatly curtailed here in the 21st century because federal laws, it applies to every state of the union, that restrict and essentially prohibit pretexting for bank account information. And the law is written really well. It covers everything. Don't think you're going to be the guy or gal that's slicker or smarter or found the loophole, because if you read it, it's very thorough. It's covered from every angle. Pretexting for bank account information is a federal offense now. You can't do it. So the trend that I kind of miss, this little trick that used to work, now that the law's in effect, maybe I'm not going to say that I used it, but I'm not going to say I didn't use it. It's the birthday card trick. And it's to write a check with a clean account that you have that can't be readily traced back to your detective agency or your name, that type of thing. But you write a check and you put it in a birthday card and you say happy birthday, and you send them their $10 check or whatever it might be. When the person cashes the check, again, back in the day, they would flip that check over, they would sign it and deposit it with their bank, and you could get the bank account information off of the back of the check. When that check got routed through and came back to you, you got a pack of checks back in the old days. You flip it over and you could see the account it had been deposited to. And one of the tricks you could do is have the checks that you were using specially printed and have them for deposit only. So it would go into a checking account or a savings account, and that account would come back to you on the back of that check. You would know what bank it was and even the account number. I kind of miss that trick a little bit. If you know of or maybe remember some tricks that were used back in the day that we just don't do anymore, maybe for ethical reasons, or maybe you just don't need to anymore. Technology maybe has advanced, or whatever it might be. Drop it in the comments. I'd be very curious what you have to add to this conversation. In the meantime, this is Larry Kaye with ShadowAnyone.com. Remember, do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing.